Imagine a civilization so prosperous, its residents didn't just have enough to survive, they had enough to go completely mad. 4,000 years ago, nestled in the Jordan Valley, sat a Bronze Age superpower, a city where liquid gold quite literally bubbled from the earth. A landscape so lush, Abraham's nephew took one look across the plain and thought he had found the Garden of Eden itself. But today, that exact same valley is a toxic wasteland of ash and salt, the lowest, deadest point on earth. So what happened? If you ask most people, they will tell you Sodom and Gomorrah were wiped off the map for one very specific, very famous sin. But they are completely wrong. The real reason these cities burned is hidden in a single chilling verse in the book of Ezekiel. It wasn't just a moral failure, it was a cold, calculated system of cruelty, a society that criminalized compassion simply because they could. Today, we're going to reconstruct exactly what life was like inside these cities. The wealth that made them the envy of the ancient world, the system of cruelty that grew inside their walls, and the single night that sealed their destruction forever. We will walk through the archaeological evidence that confirms something catastrophic happened here. We will reconstruct the most terrifying scene in the book of Genesis. And at the end, we will show you why the story of Sodom is not ancient history. It is a mirror. But before we go inside these walls, you need to understand what made these cities so impossibly rich. Because without wealth, the fall means nothing. But first, if you love deep biblical content like this, hit the subscribe button and let us begin. Close your eyes and imagine the Jordan Valley 4,000 years ago. The air is heavy and damp. The soil is dark, rich with minerals deposited by underground springs that have been feeding this plain for centuries. Date palms line the irrigation channels. Fields of wheat and barley stretch from the river to the foothills in rows so green they look painted. Freshwater pools dot the landscape, where flocks drink and birds circle in slow turns above the water. This is not the barren desert the modern viewer associates with the Dead Sea. This is a garden. Genesis chapter 13 verse 10 records the moment Lot first saw it. When Lot lifted his eyes, he saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. That comparison is not poetic exaggeration. The text places this valley alongside Eden and the Nile Delta, the two most fertile landscapes in the entire biblical imagination. Paleobotanical studies in the Dead Sea region confirm this description was accurate. Fossilized pollen indicates intensive cultivation of cereals, legumes, and fruit trees on a commercial scale. The mineral-rich soil produced yields 3 times larger than neighboring regions. Harvests came with almost supernatural abundance. When Abraham offered Lot any land he wanted, Lot did not hesitate. His eyes saw paradise. He chose it without a second thought. He chose wrong. But the fields were only the beginning. The real wealth came from something buried beneath the ground. Genesis chapter 14 verse 10 mentions the bitumen pits that filled the valley of Sodom. These pits shimmered with heat even at dawn. Workers wrapped their hands in cloth before hauling the tar because it blistered skin on contact. The smell was acrid, chemical, thick enough to taste on the back of your tongue. But every bucket pulled from those pits was worth more than a month of grain. Bitumen was the petroleum of the ancient world. The Egyptians paid fortunes for this substance. It was essential for mummification, the process that guaranteed pharaohs their passage to the afterlife. Builders across Mesopotamia needed it to waterproof bricks. Shipbuilders used it to seal hulls. Whoever controlled the pits controlled an inexhaustible source of wealth, a raw material the entire ancient world needed and could not produce. And the wealth did not stop there. The Dead Sea produced the highest quality salt in the ancient world. In an era without refrigeration, salt was the only reliable way to preserve food. Entire caravans traveled hundreds of kilometers to collect this white gold that was worth its weight in silver in distant cities. The trade routes connecting Mesopotamia to Egypt passed through the Jordan Valley. Controlling those routes meant taxing every caravan, regulating every transaction, and profiting from every piece of international commerce that moved between the two great civilizations. Tall El Hammam, the archaeological site that many researchers believe to be the original location of Sodom, reveals the scale of this wealth. Dr. Stephen Collins, who leads the excavations, has uncovered 10-meter-high walls, complex gate systems with multiple security chambers, and massive storage facilities that suggest commerce on a regional scale. This was not a village. This was a Bronze Age economic superpower, a city with more natural wealth than it knew what to do with. And that was the problem, because when you have everything without effort, when the land produces on its own and money flows from the ground like water, something happens to human character that no wall can protect against. The Prophet Ezekiel gave the exact diagnosis of what was rotting this civilization from the inside, and it started with 3 words: pride, fullness of bread, abundance of idleness. Ezekiel chapter 16 verse 49 identifies these 3 conditions with the precision of a pathologist reading a post-mortem. These were not metaphors, they were the clinical cause of death for an entire civilization. The Hebrew word Ezekiel uses for pride is gaion. It does not mean simple confidence, it means arrogant superiority, the deep, reflexive contempt that grows in people who have never faced genuine difficulty. It was the kind of pride that makes a person look at a hungry stranger standing at the gate and think, "That problem is not mine." Not confidence, contempt. The fullness of bread was not merely having enough food. This was excess so extreme it warped collective behavior. Archaeological excavations reveal enormous underground silos carved directly into rock, storage chambers with sophisticated ventilation systems, and capacity to hold grain reserves far exceeding what the population required. When food has been guaranteed for generations, something changes in the collective psychology. Waste becomes ritual. Throwing food away becomes a display of power. Banquets that serve no purpose beyond demonstrating wealth become daily routine. Anthropologists have documented this pattern across prosperous ancient societies, ritualistic excess as proof of status. The abundance of idleness was the most dangerous symptom. In nearly every ancient culture, survival demanded daily labor. Shepherds tended flocks. Farmers planted grain, craftsmen produced tools, but in Sodom, the automatic wealth pouring from the bitumen pits and salt trade created an entire class of people who did nothing productive. Cuneiform texts from contemporary Mesopotamian civilizations describe similar societies where prolonged idleness generated escalating behavioral corruption. When there is no purpose in daily life, when there are no challenges to overcome and no problems that demand attention, boredom becomes a destructive force. People with infinite time and unlimited money begin seeking increasingly extreme forms of stimulation to fill the void. But Ezekiel does not stop at pride, food, and idleness. He adds a 4th diagnosis, and it is the one that sealed the verdict. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. Translated directly from the Hebrew, this means they possessed the resources to help and deliberately chose not to. In the ancient Near East, hospitality was not courtesy, it was survival law. The Code of Hammurabi, contemporary to the time of Abraham, established specific legal protections for strangers, and Sodom reversed this ancient law. Helping the poor became weakness. The display of wealth became the only social priority. When everyone competes to show who has more, giving something to someone who cannot give back breaks the entire logic of status. Archaeological evidence at Tall El Hammam supports this picture. Houses with elaborate inward-facing courtyards, high walls separating properties from one another. A total absence of communal spaces where the vulnerable could seek help. The urban architecture was designed for isolation, not community. The city was built to keep people out. Later, rabbinic sources preserved oral traditions about the judicial system of Sodom. According to these historical traditions, there were laws that punished anyone caught giving charity and judges who confiscated the goods of citizens caught helping those in need. Whether these traditions are historically precise or not, they align perfectly with the portrait Ezekiel paints. A society that criminalized compassion, and this coldness toward the vulnerable did not remain passive. When a culture stops protecting the defenseless, it is only a matter of time before it begins to actively target them. Genesis chapter 19 verse 9 records the moment the crowd turned on Lot for defending the strangers in his home. Stand back. This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. In Sodom, defending a stranger made you a target. But the cruelty toward the poor was not the final act. There was something the men of this city did on their last night alive, something so extreme, so far beyond any human remedy, that it made God decide there was nothing left to save. And it began with two strangers walking through the city gate at sunset. The sun drops behind the western hills. The heat of the day is fading, but the city walls still radiate warmth from the stone. The square is emptying. Merchants are closing their stalls, and two men walk through the gate. Lot is sitting at the gate. Genesis chapter 19 verse 1. In Mesopotamian legal codes from the time of Abraham, such as the laws of Eshnunna, urban gates functioned as official courts. Elders and leaders gathered there to judge disputes, settle contracts, and make decisions that affected the entire population. Sitting at the gate meant holding a position in the city's governance. Lot has a seat of authority in Sodom, but when he sees these two strangers, his reaction reveals everything about the city he lives in. He does not casually invite them to dinner. He bows with his face to the ground. He presses them, insists they come to his house. When they say they will spend the night in the square, Lot presses harder. His urgency is not politeness. It is fear. Lot knows what happens to strangers who spend the night in the open in this city. He has seen it before. They reach his house. Lot prepares bread. The door closes. For a brief moment, there is warmth. Lamplight on the mud brick walls. Bread on the table. Conversation. The last peaceful hour inside Sodom. Then comes the sound. A knock, then another, then shouting, then the heavy press of bodies against the outer walls. Genesis chapter 19, verse 4, delivers the most chilling census in all of Scripture. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. Read that again. All the men from every part of the city, both young and old, not a mob, not a radical faction, not a fringe group emboldened by darkness. The entire male population. The text is explicit. Every generation, every neighborhood, every household, they came together for one purpose. They shout to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can know them." The Hebrew word used here is yada. In this context, the meaning is violent and sexual. The entire city has arrived at one man's door to commit collective violence against defenseless strangers. This was not impulse. This was the system operating exactly as designed. A civilization that criminalized compassion had inevitably arrived at its logical destination. Organized predation against the vulnerable. Lot goes outside. He closes the door behind him. He begs the crowd not to do this wicked thing. His attempt to bargain, offering his own daughters in place of the strangers, reveals the impossible moral calculus of a man who has lived inside a collapsed moral system for too long. It is the desperate negotiation of someone who knows there are no good options left. The crowd is not interested in negotiation. Their rage turns from the strangers to Lot himself. Stand back. This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We will treat you worse than them. They surge forward. The door is about to give. The strangers, the angels, reach through the doorway, pull Lot inside, and slam the door shut. Then they strike every man standing at the door with blindness, young and old, from the nearest to the farthest. Darkness falls on the entire crowd in an instant. And here is the detail that reveals the absolute depth of what Sodom had become. After being struck blind, unable to see their own hands in front of their faces, the men of Sodom did not stop. They did not scatter. They did not cry out in fear or confusion. Genesis chapter 19 verse 11 says, "They wearied themselves trying to find the door. They kept groping." Blinded by the power of God, in total darkness, they still tried to force their way inside. They could not see, and they still did not stop. That single verse is the diagnosis. That is a city beyond any human intervention, beyond warning, beyond patience, beyond mercy that offers another chance. The blindness was the test, and they failed it. The door they could no longer find was the last door God would ever open for them. The angels turned to Lot. "Get everyone you have out of this city, sons, daughters, anyone who belongs to you. We are going to destroy this place." The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. Lot runs through the dark streets to warn the men engaged to his daughters. He tells them what is coming. Genesis chapter 19 verse 14 records their response. But his sons-in-law thought he was joking, even now, even with angels in the house, even after the blinding. The system had so normalized the city's behavior that the people inside it could not recognize the warning when it came. When morning arrives, Lot hesitates. After the siege, after the blinding, after the angels telling him the city will be destroyed, he hesitates. The angels have to grab him by the hand, his wife by the hand, his 2 daughters by the hand, and physically drag them out of the city. Genesis chapter 19 verse 16 adds 5 words that stop everything, the Lord being merciful to him, even now, even after all of this, grace, pulling him by the hand out of the fire. The command is simple: flee for your lives. Do not look back. Do not stop anywhere in the plain. Lot's wife turned. One glance backward. Maybe she was looking for the house. Maybe she was looking for the life. The salt crystallized around her where she stood. A pillar fixed on the ridge above the valley. A permanent monument to the cost of looking back at what God has told you to leave behind. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heaven. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. The first sign is not fire. It is a pressure change, a deep vibration that makes the dogs stop barking and the birds fall silent mid-flight. Then the sky splits. Not lightning, something heavier, something that turns the air itself into a weapon. The temperature spikes so fast that the limestone walls glow white for a fraction of a second before they collapse inward. The bitumen pits, the source of all that wealth, ignite instantly. Black smoke rises in columns visible from the mountains of Moab. The granaries that stored generations of surplus grain are incinerated. The irrigation channels boil dry. The date palms that lined the valley char into black columns, standing like monuments to what was. It takes minutes. The most fertile valley on earth becomes a wasteland of ash, salt, and sulfur. Then silence, a low groaning sound as structures cool and settle into rubble. The air thick with the chemical smell of burning mineral. Where a city stood, only a mound of superheated debris. Where thousands lived, nothing moves. Abraham, standing near Hebron 20 miles to the west, looks toward the valley the next morning. Genesis chapter 19, verse 28. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. The man who had once looked at this valley and seen paradise, now watches it burn. Modern science confirms that something catastrophic happened here. In 2021, a team of 21 scientists published a study in the journal Nature Scientific Reports examining the destruction layer at Tall El Hammam. The findings were staggering. Pottery had been vitrified, heated so fast and so intensely that the clay fused into glass. Mud brick was melted. Limestone was transformed into calcium oxide, a chemical reaction that requires temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, far beyond anything a normal fire or military siege could produce. The research team concluded the evidence is consistent with a cosmic airburst event, a space rock detonating in the atmosphere above the city. The comparison they drew was to the 1908 Tunguska event in Siberia, which flattened 80 million trees across 2,000 square kilometers. The calculated blast at Tall El Hammam produced heat and pressure comparable to a nuclear detonation, instantaneous, catastrophic, and lethal to every living thing within the radius. Analysis of the destruction layer also revealed a massive spike in salt concentration, consistent with superheated Dead Sea brine being blasted across the surrounding landscape. The soil was so contaminated that the region remained uninhabitable for more than 600 years after the event, 6 centuries before anyone could plant a seed or build a wall on that ground again. The text says, "Fire and sulfur from heaven." The archaeology says a catastrophic airburst producing temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees. The text says the region was destroyed. The soil samples confirm 600 years of abandonment. The text says salt and desolation. The chemistry confirms massive salt contamination. The ancient scroll and the modern laboratory point to the same morning, the same valley, the same fire, where the most fertile plain in the ancient world once stood. There is now the Dead Sea, the lowest point on the surface of the earth. 330 meters below sea level, the salt concentration is so extreme that no fish survive, no plants grow, no organisms live in its waters. The shoreline is crusted white with mineral deposits. The air smells of sulfur and salt. This is the scar. 4,000 years later, the land still remembers what the people forgot. Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 23, preserves the aftermath as a permanent warning. The whole land will be a burning waste of salt and sulfur, nothing planted, nothing sprouting, no vegetation growing on it. It will be like the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Moses pointed at the landscape and told Israel's children, "Look at what happens." Jude chapter 1, verse 7 frames it with the language of evidence. Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns serve as an example of those who suffer the punishment of eternal fire. The Greek word, for example, is deigma, a specimen, a display case. Sodom was not just punished, it was preserved as evidence for every generation that would come after. And Jesus himself reached back to Sodom when he described the final chapter of human history, Luke chapter 17, verses 28 through 30. It was the same in the days of Lot. People were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building, but the day Lot left Sodom, fire and sulfur rained down from heaven and destroyed them all. It will be just like this on the day the Son of Man is revealed. Total normality, interrupted by total destruction. No warning signs in the economy, no military threat on the horizon. Markets functioning, construction continuing, meals being served, and then, in a single morning, fire. Jesus did not use Sodom as a metaphor. He used it as a preview. Here is what Ezekiel actually said destroyed Sodom. Not the sin you are thinking of right now, not the scene at Lot's door. Those were symptoms, the final eruption of a disease that had been growing for generations. But the disease itself was something quieter: pride, excess, idleness, and the absolute refusal to help anyone who could not help them back. And here is the true revelation of the mirror. The people of Sodom did not think they were the villains. When you have that much wealth, you start to believe you deserve it. You start to believe your prosperity is actual proof of your virtue. Sodom had full granaries and empty hearts, overflowing pits of wealth and not a single act of mercy on record. Everything they needed and nothing they were willing to give. That is not ancient history. That is a diagnosis you can run on any society on earth right now, including the one you are sitting in. So let me ask you something, and I do not want you to answer in the comments. I want you to answer in your own mind. Right now. Honestly. When was the last time your abundance produced generosity? When was the last time your comfort produced compassion? When was the last time you threw food away? You know the answer. It was this week, maybe today. You scraped something off a plate into the bin without thinking about it. And somewhere on this earth, right now, a mother is watching her child fall asleep hungry and praying that tomorrow will be different. You did not cause her pain, but you did not feel it either. And that distance between her hunger and your waste is exactly the distance that existed between the gates of Sodom and the stranger standing outside them. You have food in your kitchen right now that people in other parts of the world would weep over. You have access to information, resources, and opportunity that most human beings who have ever lived could not have even imagined. You have fullness of bread. You have abundance of ease. What does your abundance produce? There is someone in your life right now who is quietly falling apart. You have seen the signs, the cancelled plans, the shorter replies, the look in their eyes that says something is wrong, but their mouth says they are fine. You noticed. And you kept scrolling, you kept moving. You had things to do. That is not cruelty. You are not a monster. But it is the exact same arithmetic that ran Sodom. I have enough. They do not. And that is not my problem. Sodom did not fall because God was angry about one moment on one night. Sodom fell because an entire civilization looked at the immense blessings they had been given and decided those blessings existed for personal consumption alone. They turned inward. They built higher walls. They closed the gates. And they convinced themselves that because they were at peace, they were doing nothing wrong. The fire did not create the emptiness. It revealed it. The Dead Sea sits at the lowest point on the surface of the earth. The water is too salty for anything to survive. The shoreline is white with mineral deposits. If you stand on the eastern ridge today and look west across that lifeless water, you are looking at the same landscape Abraham saw the morning after the fire. Dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace. 4,000 years later, the scar is still there. The land remembers what the people forgot. That prosperity, without purpose, is not a blessing. It is a countdown. What does your abundance produce? If that question landed somewhere you were not expecting, I want to hear from you. What is one thing you are going to do differently this week? Drop it in the comments. Not a vague promise, a specific action. Because Sodom did not fall from one big decision. It fell from 1,000 small ones, and so do we. I read every single comment.